The train creaked to a stop at Hollow Ridge Station, its rusted wheels shrieking like a warning. Through the smudged glass, Iris Langley watched the mist roll in from the cliffs, blanketing the coastal town in its familiar, soft gray. The landscape hadn't changed. Neither had the weight in her chest. 12 years had passed since she last stepped foot in this place. 12 years since her mother's death, an open and shut case of accidental fall, they said, and Iris had accepted that story for a time, until the letter came. No return address, just a single typed line. Your mother didn't fall, she was pushed. Stonehaven Hall sat like a sleeping giant on the northern slope of Hollow Ridge, its once proud ivy-covered walls now worn with time and weather. The wrought iron gate groaned open when Iris pushed it, and the gravel crunched beneath her boots as she walked up the path she used to run barefoot as a child. The front door resisted for a moment before giving way with a sigh of wood. Inside, dust floated in the sunbeams like ghosts waiting to be acknowledged. The air smelled of damp paper and old lavender, her mother's perfume, faint but still there. Furniture stood where it had always been, but time had bleached everything into paler shades. Iris walked through the halls in silence, her fingers brushing over surfaces, memories stirring with each touch. The piano in the drawing room was closed, the curtains in the sitting room drawn shut. A teacup sat in the corner cabinet, cracked but clean. Her mother's absence was louder than any presence. Upstairs, the bedroom door creaked open easily. The sheets were folded, the dressing table untouched. A single photograph sat beside the mirror. Margot Langley, smiling, holding a sketch pad, hair blowing wildly in the wind by the cliffs. Iris touched the frame and blinked away the sting in her eyes. 12 years, and it still felt like yesterday. Or worse, like no time had passed at all. The town hadn't changed much either. Hollow Ridge was a place where time moved slower, stubbornly clinging to its old houses and older secrets. The bakery on Elm still smelled like burnt sugar and sea salt. The church bells still rang at odd hours. Children she once played with now passed her on the street with children of their own, some recognizing her, most pretending not to. She was the girl who left and never came back. The girl whose mother died mysteriously. The one who, for some, was better left forgotten. At the grocer, the woman at the till gave her a tight smile. "Thought you were living in Paris now," she said, not as a question, but as a reminder that she'd been gone too long to matter. "I was." "Yep," Iris replied simply, placing a tin of tea on the counter. "Now I'm here." The woman bagged her items in silence, eyes darting to the small scar just beneath Iris's jaw, the one she'd gotten falling from the apple tree behind the schoolhouse. No words were exchanged after that. Everywhere she went, the town greeted her with the same polite distance, familiar eyes that flicked toward her, then away. Like they knew something she didn't. Like they still carried the same whispers from over a decade ago. Back at Stonehaven, Iris unpacked slowly, choosing the old guest room instead of her childhood bedroom. The latter felt too full of ghosts. As night fell, she lit the fireplace in the library, the only room that truly felt like her mother's. Shelves upon shelves of books, notes in the margins, the smell of old paper and ink. She curled up in the worn leather armchair, holding the letter again. She had read it at least 20 times since it arrived. Your mother didn't fall. She was pushed. There was no signature, no other clue. Just that single sentence and the truth that it had already changed everything. She wasn't here to grieve. Not anymore. She was here to uncover what really happened that night on the cliffs. And she knew, deep down, that the answers wouldn't come easily. Hollow Ridge didn't like being questioned, especially by one of its own who dared to leave. But Iris Langley had come back not as a daughter mourning a mother. She had come back as a woman ready to bury the silence. And Stonehaven, for all its rot and quiet, would speak again. The invitation had arrived on cream paper with gold edges, elegant and sterile. It bore the Thorne family crest, 2 roses crossed beneath a serpent. Alara stared at it for a long time before deciding to go. There was no name signed, just a simple line, "You are expected." The Thorn estate stood at the heart of Rosewood Hollow, like a monument to legacy. Its towers rose above the fog, windows glowing with warm light that didn't reach the ground. The garden had been trimmed back, the hedges shaped like they'd never known wildness. Alara stepped out of the car and adjusted the collar of her coat. Every breath she took felt like it came through glass. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with candlelight and the soft hum of string instruments. The chandeliers above sparkled like icicles frozen mid-fall. The guests wore their finest: pearls, cufflinks, velvet, all the weapons of appearances. Alara's presence did not go unnoticed. Conversations faltered, heads turned. A few people tried to smile. Most didn't. She walked slowly, deliberately, not out of arrogance, but purpose. This was the house that tried to bury her mother, the family that turned their backs. And somewhere inside it stood the man who once made her believe in love, only to abandon her when she needed him most. She spotted Seraphine Blake before she saw Lucien. Seraphine stood at the center of the crowd, tall and sharp in a crimson gown that looked more like a warning than a celebration. Her hair was styled like royalty, and her laughter rang too loud, too sweet, too aware. When she turned and saw Alara, the mask cracked, but only for a second. "Well, well," Seraphine said as she approached. "The ghost of Renford returns." Alara didn't flinch. "I wasn't aware you were hosting a seance." Seraphine's smile tightened. "You look better than expected." "I always did," Alara replied softly. Before Seraphine could strike again, Lucien appeared. He walked toward them with the same gait she remembered, controlled, elegant, guarded. Time had changed him. His jaw was more defined, his eyes more tired, but the moment they locked eyes, something between them stilled. The room, the noise, even the music dimmed. "Alara," he said, almost like an apology. "Lucien," she replied, voice steady. "You look well, grief suits you." He didn't respond right away. Just looked at her the way someone looks at a place they once called home and now only recognize in pieces. Seraphine slid her arm into his and looked up at him with a rehearsed sweetness. "Darling, shall we greet the judge next?" Lucien's eyes didn't leave Alara's. He hesitated, but eventually he nodded and let Seraphine lead him away, her grip like a vice. Alara stood alone for a moment, watching them disappear into the crowd. Her heart didn't ache like she thought it might. It burned, not with longing, but with clarity. That man, Lucien Thorn, was no longer hers, and maybe he never truly was. She turned and walked to the far end of the ballroom where the old portraits of the Thorn family lined the wall. Generations of cold eyes and pale skin, the weight of their names pressed into the gold of their frames. Among them, she recognized the man who had once smiled at her mother in public, but called her dangerous in private. These people had decided who mattered and who could be discarded. And tonight, Alara had come to remind them what they buried was still breathing. She took a glass of champagne, lifted it silently to the room of porcelain faces and porcelain hearts, and drank. Not to the past, but to vengeance, quiet, measured, and patient. Because love may have failed her, but vengeance would not. The attic of Stonehaven Hall had always smelled of forgotten seasons, cedarwood, mothballs, and old summer dust. Iris pushed the door open slowly, letting light from the narrow window stretch across covered trunks, crooked lamps, and boxes with crumbling labels. The air was colder up here, like the house held its breath in this room. She wasn't sure what had led her there that morning. Maybe it was restlessness. Maybe it was the growing feeling that someone had left her breadcrumbs to follow. Near the back wall, half covered in a moth-eaten sheet, she found a painting. Its wooden frame was chipped and rotting at the corners. A woman stood at the center of the canvas, back turned, facing a rocky shoreline that looked eerily like Hollow Ridge's cliffs. The brushwork was delicate, almost haunting. The figure wore a pale blue dress, soft, blurred at the hem like mist touching fabric. Iris dragged the painting down to the parlor and set it on a low table near the fireplace. She cleaned it gently, working her brush over the surface in slow, careful strokes. The canvas hissed softly with each sweep. Beneath the grime, detail emerged. The threads of embroidery on the woman's dress, the faint impression of initials painted in the bottom corner. As she tilted the frame to reach the back, she noticed something odd, a soft rustling. She tapped the canvas gently, then felt along the wooden stretcher. A slit had been made along the bottom seam. Tucked inside, flattened, almost fused with age, was an envelope. Her breath caught. The paper crackled as she opened it. Inside were old receipts from a local gallery, 2 ledger entries showing large transfers of money to a private account, and one handwritten note folded in half and marked with a single ink blot. Iris unfolded it slowly. Open quote, "They buried more than truth. They buried me while I was still breathing. M," close quote. The signature at the bottom looked like Margot's. Her mother's flourished L, the way she crossed her T's with a downward stroke. But the ink bled in uneven places, like the hand that had written it had been trembling, like fear had guided the pen more than thought. Iris's hands were cold as she read it again. Then again. This wasn't just about embezzlement. This wasn't about some small-town scandal pushed into silence. Her mother had uncovered something, and someone had made sure that discovery died with her. Or so they thought. She laid the receipts out on the table and traced the dates. One transaction matched the week Margot was found dead. Another came 2 days after, signed under a name Iris didn't recognize. The account was linked to a shell company registered in London, one that hadn't existed until that year. Iris circled the signature. It wasn't Margot's, it wasn't Iris's, but it looked deliberately forged. She leaned back in the armchair, eyes drifting toward the window. Outside, the waves pounded against the shore like a warning drum. Rain had started again. Light, for now. What disturbed her more than the note was the feeling she couldn't shake, the sense that someone had wanted her to find it, that the letter wasn't a last cry for help, but a test. Could she finish what her mother started? In the evening, she visited the library in town, dusty but still functional, with a new assistant who barely looked up as she passed. Iris spent hours pulling public records, cross-referencing names from the ledger entries. Some led nowhere, but one name, V.D. Quinn, surfaced more than once, in connection with land ownership, legal consultations, and anonymous donations to Holleridge's Preservation Fund. She sat still for a long time, staring at the name. Quinn, like Harper Quinn, Rowan's fiancé, her pulse quickened. The threads were starting to tangle. That night, back at Stonehaven, she placed the letter beside her bed. The painting leaned against the far wall, the woman in blue now clearer than before. Iris stared at her, wondering what truth she'd turned her back to. She didn't sleep easily, because now silence was no longer a shield. It was a weapon, and Iris had just drawn the first blade. The sun broke through the clouds just enough to paint the Holleridge Hills in soft gold as Iris walked the winding path to Silas Greaves's cottage. It sat at the edge of the town's oldest cemetery, a modest stone house shaded by willow trees and silence. The same house where she used to spend lazy summer afternoons with tea and books, while her mother discussed restoration commissions and church politics with Silas on the porch. He was waiting for her now, sitting in a worn armchair by the front window, a blanket over his knees and a pot of black tea steaming gently on the table between them. "You look more like her now," he said as she stepped inside, his voice dry but warm. The eyes, the fire behind them. Iris gave a tight smile. "I've had reasons to burn." He gestured for her to sit. The room smelled of dried herbs and old books. The fireplace cracked softly. "I found something," she said, placing the folded letter and receipts on the table. "In a painting, hidden behind the canvas. It wasn't just about embezzlement, was it?" Silas stared at the paper without touching it, his eyes clouded, not from age but from memory. "No," he finally said. It was never about money. It was about leverage, power. He poured tea for both of them, but his hands trembled. Your mother was working on a commission for the Hollow Ridge Trust. Nothing grand, just restoring old portraits in the courthouse. But while doing so, she came across original documents hidden behind a frame. Land deeds, donation records, transfers that didn't make sense. She brought them to me. He paused, looked directly at her. They pointed to people, Iris, important people, names that funded this town, that kept it running. She said she was going to report them, said it was time Hollow Ridge stopped pretending to be clean. Iris swallowed hard, but she didn't. Silas nodded slowly. 3 days before her death, she gave a speech at the Historical Society dinner. A quiet one. Not public, but she said things, veiled warnings. That truth rots in silence, that even roses have roots buried in the dead. He took a sip of tea, then set it down untouched. 2 nights later, she called me. She was scared, said someone had come to the house, left her door open, no theft, a warning. Iris's hands curled into fists. Why didn't you go to the police? She asked. Silas's face twisted. I did, or I thought I did, but the officer who took my report disappeared from the station a week later. Reassigned, they said, no record of the statement, and then she was gone. Iris stared into her tea as it grew cold. What exactly did she find? She asked. Silas shook his head. I never saw all of it, just pieces. But I know she believed the trust was a front, that Rowan's father, the mayor, and members of the Quinn family had been siphoning restoration grants meant for public landmarks into personal accounts. And your mother? She wasn't going to be quiet about it. He leaned in, voice low now. Iris, I'm telling you this not to send you chasing ghosts. I'm telling you because you need to know what your mother stood for. And what she died for, Iris added. Silas hesitated. Maybe. But she also died on the cliffs, alone, and no one saw what really happened. She didn't fall, Iris said flatly. She was pushed. Silas didn't argue. Instead, he said, You dig too deep. You may find something meant to stay buried. Iris stood. Then maybe it's time someone stopped protecting the dirt. As she stepped outside, the wind picked up, rustling the dead leaves at her feet. She looked out toward the cliffs in the distance, sharp, jagged, and still. The same cliffs that had taken her mother. But they hadn't taken the truth. And now, she was coming back for it. Not as a grieving daughter, but as the one left behind to finish what Margot Langley had started. It was nearly midnight when Iris heard the knock. Stonehaven Hall, silent for hours, echoed with the sound like a distant bell. She hesitated at the top of the staircase, the letter from her mother still in her hand, her mind cluttered with receipts, memories, and Silas's words. Another knock. She walked slowly down the stairs, heart uneasy. The fire in the library had died to embers. Outside, mist clung to the windows like breath on glass. When she opened the front door, the figure standing on the steps was soaked in rain and shadow, but unmistakably, Rowan Mercer. He looked older than she remembered, more than the 12 years should have allowed. His hair was wet, jacket unbuttoned, jaw tense. His eyes searched hers, not with defiance, but with a quiet desperation. I shouldn't be here, he said, voice low. But you are, she replied, unmoving. Can I come in? She stepped aside wordlessly. He entered, his shoes leaving wet marks on the stone floor, and she led him into the dim library. The smell of old wood and rain filled the air between them. He stood near the hearth, gaze flickering over the shelves, the worn chair where Margot used to sit with her tea. I saw the painting, he said. The one in the gallery. You restored it beautifully. Iris said nothing. She waited. He turned back to her, eyes rimmed red. I was there, Iris, he said. Her breath caught, but she didn't move. I was here the night your mother died. She came to me, terrified. She had documents, she had names. She said she couldn't trust anyone in town. Not the mayor, not the police. She wanted legal protection, a way to go public. Iris's hands curled around the edge of the desk. She begged me to help her, Rowan continued. But I was fresh out of law school, working under my father. I knew if I got involved, if I touched what she had. He paused, swallowed hard. My career would have been over before it began. Iris blinked slowly, her face unreadable. I told her I couldn't help, Rowan said, that it was too dangerous, that maybe she should wait, think it through, and she looked at me like I was a stranger, like I had just pushed her off that cliff myself. The room fell into silence. Rowan stepped closer, almost cautiously. The next morning, they found her body. I wanted to speak. I tried, but by then, it was too late. The narrative was already clean. They said it was an accident, and his voice cracked. I let it happen. Iris stood still. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. You let her die alone. Rowan's eyes closed. I was afraid, he said, and I've hated myself for it every day since. She stared at him, not the boy she used to love, not the man she once imagined a future with, but the silence, the weakness, the choice. He hadn't pulled her mother over the edge, but he hadn't held her back either. Iris walked to the fireplace, where a half-burnt piece of newspaper sat in the grate. It was from the week Margot died. Community honors Langley legacy, a life remembered, a lie printed in clean serif font. Why now? She asked. Why come to me now? Rowan exhaled. Because I saw the ledger. I saw your mother's handwriting again. And because I can't pretend anymore. Not with Harper watching everything I do. Not with your name being whispered through this town like a ghost. Iris turned slowly. You were supposed to be better than them, she said, her voice shaking, not with rage, but with grief. You knew the difference, and you chose silence. Rowan didn't argue. I'm sorry, Iris. She looked at him for a long time. Then finally she said, you don't get to be sorry and clean. And then she turned away, walked back to the desk, and picked up the folder of documents she'd been organizing. Margot's receipts, Silas's notes, a copy of the Quinn family's shell company registration. Rowan lingered a moment longer, but Iris said nothing more. When he left, he didn't close the door fully behind him. The wind crept in, curling around her like the memory of something once warm. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, but something inside her cracked open. And through it, something else began to grow. Not love, not hope, but resolve, cold, quiet, and absolute. The gallery buzzed with champagne laughter and polished smiles. White walls bore bold canvases, modern, abstract splashes of red and an obsidian, and guests murmured in admiration they barely meant. Crystal glasses clinked softly, shoes echoed on marble, and in the farthest corner, under a spotlight, hung the painting Iris had restored, the woman in the pale blue dress facing the cliffs, her back to the viewer. The plaque beneath it read, Margot Langley, 1948 to 2011, untitled, reclaimed. Iris stood nearby watching. She had chosen this night deliberately, not for the art, not even for the legacy her mother never got to claim, but because Harper Quinn would be here. Harper always came to events where people watched her, where she could control the narrative. And tonight, Iris planned to loosen that control. She spotted her by the champagne tower, dressed in white satin, laughing too brightly with a curator and the mayor's daughter. As if on cue, Harper turned and saw her. Their eyes locked. The smile vanished. Excuse me, Harper said, handing off her glass. She approached with smooth steps, every inch composed elegance, but Iris could already see the tension in her jaw. When they stopped face to face, the gallery noise seemed to recede, like air before a thunderclap. I wasn't aware this was your kind of scene, Harper said coolly, eyeing Iris's black dress like it didn't belong. I didn't come for the art, Iris replied. I came for the truth. Harper's lips twitched, barely a smile. Still grieving, I see. Some people mourn quietly, others build their sadness into accusations. I have names, Iris said. Receipts, ledger entries. I know who benefited when the restoration funds disappeared, and I know Margot was about to reveal it before she died. Harper stepped closer. Careful, she said, voice low. Throwing around threats makes you sound desperate. I'm not desperate, Iris replied, but I am done being silent. Harper's face shifted just for a second. Then she laughed, sharp, forced. You know what I think, Iris? You want this to be about justice, but it's really just about Rowan. You still want to believe he was yours, that you mattered. I don't want him, Iris said flatly. I want what he helped bury. Harper's smile broke. Her voice turned brittle. He loved you, but you ran. You left this town and let it swallow your mother whole. Don't come back now, pretending to be righteous. You're 12 years too late. For a moment, Iris said nothing. She studied Harper's face. Her eyes were bright, not with fury, but something else. Something brittle. Something terrified. You're protecting someone? Iris said quietly. And it's not Rowan. Harper flinched. I think you know what happened on those cliffs, Iris continued. And I think you've been told not to talk. Not because of love, but because of what they still hold over you. Harper opened her mouth to speak, then shut it. Her fingers clenched around her clutch bag. She stepped back. I would tread carefully, she said, her voice shaking slightly now. You don't know who you're pushing. Maybe not, Iris replied, but I know where to push next. She turned and walked away, leaving Harper standing beneath the gallery lights that suddenly felt too hot, too bright. Outside, the cold air hit Iris like clarity. The wind off the cliffs carried the scent of salt and something deeper. She stood beneath the gallery's stone awning, heart pounding, not with fear, but momentum. She didn't need Harper's confession tonight. She had confirmation in her eyes, and somewhere between fear and silence, there was a door waiting to be broken. Iris Langley had the key, and she was going to use it. It was nearly dawn when Iris tore the last rotten plank loose. Dust billowed up from beneath the floorboards in her mother's old study, clouding the air with the scent of age and forgotten things. Her hands were raw, her knees ached. She hadn't slept, not really, not since the gallery. But something in Harper's eyes that night had kept her mind racing and led her back to this room, this corner, this crack in the floor that her mother once paced over every sleepless night. She pried deeper into the crevice, her flashlight flickering. There, beneath a loose beam and layers of mold-stained insulation, something brittle resisted her touch. She pulled it out slowly, a folded sheet of paper, water-warped, corners crumbling, but ink still legible. She unfolded it carefully, laying it flat on the floor in front of her. It was a missing page from the ledger, the one her mother had started piecing together before her death. Iris recognized the handwriting immediately, her mother's clean, looping script in black ink. But what stopped her cold wasn't the list of transactions or the dates. It was the names. Councilman Gareth Talbot, Dean Milner of the Historical Trust, Victoria Quinn, and at the very top, Lawrence Mercer, Rowan's father. Each name was listed beside a column of amounts, 4- and 5-figure sums funneled through heritage restoration grants that had supposedly gone to refurbishing historical sites in Hollow Ridge. The notes in the margins were damning. References to fake invoices, inflated material costs, and redirection of funds into what Margot labeled a personal estate project for the Quinns. Iris sat back against the wall, heart hammering. This was the smoking gun her mother never got to show. And she realized now, this page must have been the one Margot had been afraid of, the one she'd hidden deep in the house, too risky to carry, too powerful to destroy. The one that proved this wasn't carelessness or small-town corruption. It was a conspiracy. And the names on that list weren't just powerful, they were untouchable. Until now. She scanned again. The payments began 2 years before Margot's death. The last entry was dated just 6 days before the night Margot fell from the cliffs. Beneath it, her mother had scrawled in bold, slanted ink, open quote, "If anything happens to me, start here. This page is the root," close quote. Iris swallowed, eyes burning. She sat there a while longer, just staring, as light bled through the gaps in the curtains. Later that morning, she made a photocopy of the page and placed the original in a waterproof case. Then, with trembling fingers, she slipped it inside her mother's old locket and fastened it around her neck. The weight felt both foreign and familiar. At midday, She walked into the Hollow Ridge Town Archives and requested access to building permits and preservation records from the past 15 years. The clerk hesitated but didn't refuse her. Word of her return and her presence at the gallery had already spread. Within the hour, she found discrepancies. Dozens. Grant money registered under fake company names. Signatures that matched the same tight cursive as Lawrence Mercer's on private legal contracts, and a paper trail that circled back again and again to the same 4 people. That evening, she sat in the Stonehaven Library, the fireplace lit low, the documents laid out before her like pieces of a puzzle almost complete. And she realized something important. Her mother hadn't been silenced because of what she found. She had been silenced because she almost told. Now the story waited to be finished. And Iris Langley, armed with names, numbers, and the final page, was ready to speak what her mother died to protect. But not yet to the police, not yet to the press. First, she would bring them all into one room and watch them try to explain themselves to her face. The sky tore open in shades of steel and charcoal as Iris drove up the winding coastal road. Rain pelted the windshield in hard, slanted sheets. The wipers moved too slow. Wind howled through the trees lining the cliffs, bending them like grieving women in prayer. She didn't turn back. She parked on the gravel shoulder and stepped out, coat whipping around her legs, hair already soaked. The storm had swallowed the sun, and the air smelled of salt and soil and something older. She followed the narrow path toward the edge of the cliffs, toward the place where her mother's life had ended. The sea below roared like a voice denied for too long. As lightning cracked across the horizon, Iris saw him, Inspector Alden Rush. He stood hunched beneath the overhang of a twisted cypress, a flask in one hand, collar turned up against the cold. His face was pale and pockmarked, lips pressed tight, but his eyes, sunken and watery, watched her approach like someone expecting judgment. "I figured you'd come," he said, voice gravel. "You were there?" she replied, stopping a few feet away. "Weren't you?" He didn't nod, didn't deny it. "Margot Langley didn't fall," Iris continued. "You signed the death report. You closed the case." Alden took a long swig from the flask and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "She came to me 3 days before it happened," he rasped. "Said she was afraid, that she'd uncovered something about the trust. Names, embezzlement. She didn't ask for protection. She demanded it." "And you didn't give it to her," Iris said, her voice rising with the wind. "No," he admitted, "because I knew who was involved, and I was told to stay out of it." He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his coat and held it out. Iris took it carefully, wet, blurred, but readable. A copy of the initial police statement Margot had tried to file. Not in her handwriting, but his, signed, dated, never submitted. "I was a coward," he said, swallowing hard. "I got a visit the next night. A man in a suit told me the cliffs were slippery that time of year, told me my pension was a fragile thing." Lightning lit the sea again. Thunder followed like a curse. "I found her body myself the next morning," Alden whispered, face down, fingernails full of earth, like she tried to hold on. Iris's hands clenched. Her whole body trembled, whether from cold or rage, she wasn't sure. "Why are you telling me now?" she asked. "Because I see her when I sleep," he muttered. "Because I'm dying, and because you deserve the truth, even if it's too late to mean anything." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. "I'm recording this," she said, voice even. He didn't flinch. "Good." The wind howled again, tugging at her coat. Her hair stuck to her cheeks. She stared at the cliffs, at the place where it had all ended, and felt her mother's name finally begin to rise above the lies. "She was going to stop them," Iris said softly. "I know." "She died because you didn't." Alden's jaw twitched, but he said nothing. Iris ended the recording, saved it, and slipped the phone away. She stepped closer to the cliff's edge, rain hitting her like needles. Below, the waves crashed into the rocks, violent, merciless, ancient. "She tried to hold on," she whispered. "And I will too." When she turned back, Alden was gone. his figure swallowed by the trees and mist, like he'd come only to release his ghosts. Iris stood alone on the cliffs for a long while, the sea raging at her feet. But the storm no longer scared her. She had her mother's words, her mother's ledger, and now, a confession. Next, she would have their names. And the storm she brought would not be weather, it would be reckoning. The drawing room of Stonehaven Hall had never felt so still. The long velvet curtains were drawn, and the fireplace burned low, casting shadows that flickered along the wooden paneling. The scent of tea, damp wool, and burning pine lingered in the air, but no one reached for their cups. The table at the center, once meant for card games and laughter, now bore a neatly stacked collection of truth. Documents, photocopies, voice recordings, handwritten notes. One by one, every piece of a life dismantled and buried. Iris stood at the head of the room, wearing a simple black dress, her hands steady, though her voice had barely returned from the storm the night before. She hadn't slept, but clarity had replaced exhaustion. "This isn't a memorial," she said plainly, looking each of them in the eye. "It's a reckoning." Rowan Mercer sat closest to her, shoulders stiff, his hands clenching and unclenching on his knees. He hadn't spoken since he arrived, but his eyes followed her every move. Harper, seated beside him, was tense, lips thin, face pale but defiant. She looked less polished than usual. No pearls, no red lipstick, just a woman cornered by something she no longer controlled. Silas Greaves sat by the fireplace, older than ever, his eyes filled with quiet dread. And across from him, Alden Rush, the retired inspector, still damp from the rain, his pen tucked in the breast pocket of his worn coat. Iris began with her mother's letter. She read it aloud, slowly. The words, "They buried more than truth. They buried me while I was still breathing," settled over the room like dust in a sealed tomb. Then she laid out the receipts, the ledger entries, the fake grant signatures, the shell company documents, the missing page that named them all. She said nothing for a full minute as they stared. No one moved. The fire cracked. Then she pressed play on her phone. Alden's voice, recorded on the cliff, filled the room. Open quote, "She didn't fall, she was pushed, and I signed it away." Close quote. Harper gasped before the recording even ended. Her skin turned gray. She rose to stand but swayed and collapsed backward into her chair. Her body went limp. "Harper," Rowan said, lunging to catch her, but she was out cold. Her breath came quick, shallow. A maid came rushing in, alerted by the fall, but Iris held up her hand. "She'll be fine," Iris said. "Let her hear it when she wakes up." Rowan looked at Iris as he laid Harper back gently, tears welling. "She tried to warn me," he whispered, "about my father, about all of it." "And you ignored her," Iris said, "like you ignored my mother." He bowed his head, ashamed. Alden slowly rose to his feet. "I won't fight this," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. He pulled a folded envelope from his coat and placed it on the table. "My confession, signed, handwritten, everything I should have said 12 years ago." Iris nodded once. "I'll be sending it to the district attorney by morning, along with the rest." Silas looked to her, weary. "And what happens to the town?" "What always happens," Iris said. "Truth cracks it open, and it decides whether to rot or regrow." She turned back to Rowan. "There's no redemption for what you didn't stop," she said, softly now. "But you can help rebuild what was torn apart. You can speak when others won't." He didn't answer, just nodded, tears streaking down his cheeks as he stared at the photo of Margot Iris had placed beside the fire. Outside, rain began to fall again, gentle this time, like the sky exhaling. Inside, no one spoke, no gavel slammed, no judge appeared. But the silence, raw, unfiltered, and honest, was louder than any courtroom could have offered. It was justice, not in revenge or rage, but in light, and it was enough. The early morning fog clung to Hollow Ridge like a final veil, draping its streets and steeples in silence. The town was still asleep, its windows shuttered, its cobblestones slick with dew. Iris walked down the main road with only the rhythm of her boots for company. Her suitcase rolled behind her with a soft rumble, one wheel slightly off, the sound unsteady but persistent. like her heart. Stonehaven Hall had been locked for the last time. She left the keys on the mantel with a note to the Historical Trust. Whatever came next, legal proceedings, media questions, political fallout, she would not be here to watch it unravel. The train station was empty, save for a single bench and the crows that circled far overhead. A cold wind rolled in from the cliffs, brushing strands of hair across her face. She tucked them behind her ear, her fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, from the ache of letting go. She heard his voice before she saw him. Iris? She didn't turn. Footsteps pounded against the gravel path, growing louder. Then he was beside her, out of breath and hollow-eyed, the collar of his coat turned up against the morning chill. Rowan Mercer. "I didn't come to stop you," he said, his voice rough. "I know I can't." She stared down the track, waiting for the train's silhouette to appear on the horizon. I needed to say it once. I was weak. I didn't protect your mother. I didn't protect you. I let them decide what the truth was, and I stood back like a coward." She said nothing. Rowan stepped in front of her, not to block her way, but to be seen. Really seen. "I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not even asking you to forgive me. I'm asking for a chance to be the man you thought I was, to stand on the right side of something, even if it's too late to matter." Iris finally turned. Her eyes were steady. "You had your chance to protect her," she said quietly. "Now you'll live remembering that you didn't." Rowan's expression cracked, grief carving itself deeper into the lines of his face. He stepped back as the low rumble of the train began to echo across the fields. It appeared in the distance, a shadow growing through mist and sun. Iris took one final breath of Hollow Ridge air, the scent of wet stone, wood smoke, and salt. Then she boarded without another word, sliding into a window seat near the back. The train lurched forward. The platform slipped away. Rowan remained where she left him, standing small in the growing light, the wind tugging at his coat. As the town receded, Iris watched the rooftops of Hollow Ridge disappear behind hedges and hills. The cliffs, the sea, the old places of memory, all fading into soft gray. She didn't cry. There was nothing left to mourn. She carried no ghosts now, only names, truths, and the fierce, aching knowledge that justice had not been forgotten. And somewhere beyond this train and morning's edge, there was a future waiting, not for revenge, not for closure, but for peace. And in her pocket, her mother's locket pressed warm against her palm, light now, but full of everything that mattered. The journey ahead was quiet, but for the first time in years, she wasn't running from anything.